Welcome back to the channel asking the hard-hitting questions about the logical consistency of your favorite magical anime worlds. Today we are looking at the most common and the most overpowered techniques in the ninja world to give them a strict ranking. We will rank them from 1, which is a harmless party trick, to 5, which is something that could unravel society completely. Here is the criteria, starting with 1 for a harmless trick and 2 for something that is mildly abusable by clever individuals. 3 represents society-bending things that make you wonder why every single person is not doing this all the time. 4 represents a complete collapse risk, where the technique should be causing substantial global problems but somehow is ignored by the story. Finally, 5 is the absolute apocalypse, end of civilization tier, for techniques that completely break the boundaries of the narrative. I know someone is going to type a comment saying that it is just a magical cartoon and we should ignore it. Obviously, I know it is a fictional story, but pointing out the massive logical flaws is the entire point of this channel. So, restrain your desire to defend the creator and let us jump right into the first technique on our list. The very first technique we need to discuss is the basic transformation jutsu, taught to every single academy student. At the very beginning of the series, we learn that 12-year-old children are expected to perfectly transform into other people. This is supposedly a basic requirement for graduation, which means every single active ninja in the world knows how to do it. The transformation is not just a visual illusion, because it actually alters physical mass and allows the user to interact with the world. You can turn into a completely different person, a weapon, or even an animal, and retain your human intelligence. Let us explore some of the worst-case scenarios for a world where literally anyone can perfectly impersonate anyone else. First of all, you have an immediate risk of total political collapse, because nobody could ever trust their own leadership. Any random low-level rogue ninja could transform into a feudal lord and start passing laws or starting massive global wars. There is apparently no universal detection method for this technique, which means society would devolve into absolute paranoia. You would have to assume that your family members, your friends, and your political leaders are constantly being replaced by imposters. Furthermore, the economic implications of perfect identity theft on a massive scale are completely devastating to any functioning society. Someone could simply transform into a wealthy merchant and withdraw all of the money from the local banking institutions. The entire global banking system relies on trust and identity verification, which completely falls apart when physical appearance is meaningless. The fact that the hidden villages function normally without having complex magical metal detectors everywhere makes absolutely no sense. I'm going to give the basic transformation technique a solid 4 out of 5 for completely breaking social trust. Up next is another incredibly basic academy technique known as the substitution jutsu, which fundamentally breaks the mechanics of combat. The series explains this technique as the user quickly swapping their body with a nearby object, like a wooden log. This supposedly happens in a fraction of a second, right before an enemy attack makes physical contact with the user. The massive plot hole here is the unbelievable speed required to find an object and instantly swap places with it. If a ninja is fast enough to perform this teleportation, they are fast enough to simply dodge the attack entirely. The very existence of the substitution technique creates a massive problem for every single fight scene in the entire story. If every ninja can instantly teleport a log to absorb a lethal blow, then nobody should ever get hit by anything. We frequently see highly skilled warriors getting stabbed or crushed by attacks they absolutely should have been able to substitute out of. The author eventually realized how broken this mechanic was, and quietly stopped drawing it halfway through the second part of the story. It essentially gave every single character a completely free escape option that they only remembered to use when the plot demanded it. I was trying to think about what the most extreme case here could be in a real global combat scenario. You could theoretically swap yourself with an exploding tag and instantly blow up the person who was trying to punch you. Or a powerful wizard could substitute themselves with a massive boulder and crush their opponent instantly without throwing a single punch. Because it basically functions as untargetable teleportation, it renders all hand-to-hand combat completely pointless and logically inconsistent. I think this one falls very cleanly into the 3 out of 5 tier because it completely ruins combat scaling. Now we have to talk about the signature move of the main character, which is the famous shadow clone technique. Early in the story, we are told this is a forbidden technique that creates physical copies of the user, splitting their energy evenly. For the first few hundred chapters, it functions simply as a way to overwhelm enemies with massive numbers in close combat. But then the author decided to introduce a brand new mechanic that retroactively destroyed the entire logic of the universe. We suddenly learn that whenever a shadow clone disappears, all of its memories and experiences instantly transfer back to the original user. This experience transfer mechanic means you can send a clone to read an entire library of books and instantly absorb the knowledge. The main character uses this specifically to accelerate his martial arts training by having thousands of clones train simultaneously. He accomplishes 20 years of rigorous physical and mental training in just a few days by abusing this newly introduced magical loophole. This completely breaks the concept of hard work and dedication that the story spent years trying to build up as its core theme. If anyone with large energy reserves can do this, then the entire military training system is fundamentally obsolete and inefficient. Imagine the economic and societal applications of infinite physical labor paired with instant knowledge transfer across a vast civilian population. You could have one highly educated scientist create 20 clones to run 50 different complex experiments at the exact same time. A construction worker could spawn 100 copies of himself and build an entire skyscraper in a single afternoon. The entire economy of the hidden village is based on doing manual labor and completing missions for paying civilian clients. If the village leader can just send clones to do every single mission, the entire mercenary economy would collapse overnight. Furthermore, this technique essentially removes the risk of death from any dangerous reconnaissance or espionage mission in foreign enemy territory. You just send a clone to infiltrate the enemy base, and when they get caught and destroyed, you instantly receive their intelligence. There is absolutely no reason for any human being to ever risk their real body on the battlefield ever again. The main character literally runs the entire village as the leader later in life by just sitting in an office and sending out clones. For turning the entire concept of labor and learning into an absolute joke, I give the shadow clone technique a massive 5 out of 5. Moving on, we need to discuss the telepathic abilities of the blonde interrogation family known as the mind transfer jutsu. This technique allows the user to project their consciousness into the body of another person, taking complete physical control over them. Originally, we are told this is a risky spy technique because if the possessed body takes damage, the user also feels the pain. However, the true danger of this ability lies in its potential to completely dismantle the political hierarchy of the entire world. A skilled user could easily possess the feudal lord of a rival country and command their entire army to surrender. The chances of someone being a bad actor seem pretty substantial in a way that would constantly put society on edge. You could possess a key political figure, force them to sign devastating trade agreements, and then release the technique without leaving a trace. The victim often does not even remember what happened while they were possessed, which makes it the ultimate, untraceable assassination or espionage tool. There is essentially no defense against this unless you have an incredibly strong willpower or a giant magical demon living inside your head. For most ordinary politicians and civilian leaders, this technique represents an absolute collapse of international diplomacy and trust. I was pretty much ready to give this a 3 out of 5 when I realized another terrifying application of this mental magic. The clan that uses this technique can also read memories by simply placing their hands on the head of a captured enemy. They can extract military secrets, passwords, and complex codes without the victim ever speaking a single word of truth. This makes all traditional forms of information security completely useless in the ninja world because your brain is an open book. I will give this a 4 out of 5 for completely destroying the concept of privacy and making secure leadership impossible. Let us look at something much more explosive, which is the Flying Thunder God technique, invented by the second village leader. This is essentially instant teleportation to any location that has been marked with a specific magical written seal. The fourth village leader used this to single-handedly win a global war by teleporting across massive battlefields and eliminating entire armies. By all accounts, this technique is completely undetectable and allows the user to travel across entire continents in the blink of an eye. The only limitation seems to be the user needing to manually place the physical marker beforehand or throw a marked weapon. At its core, this is an assassination spell that completely ignores all physical barriers, walls, and heavily guarded fortresses. But the real plot hole lies in the devastating impact this instant travel would have on the global logistics and trade networks. The entire mercenary economy relies heavily on hiring ninjas to protect slow-moving trade caravans traveling across dangerous enemy territory. If a single ninja can just teleport massive amounts of cargo instantly from one country to another, those escort missions become entirely pointless. You could revolutionize global shipping and generate infinite wealth by simply charging merchants to instantly teleport their valuable goods. Beyond just crashing the shipping industry, this technique creates massive tactical plot holes during the final World War arc of the story. The heroes have multiple users of this technique, but they constantly choose to run on foot across massive distances. If they can instantly teleport to anyone holding a specific marker, there is no logical reason for travel time to exist. The author has to actively make the characters forget they have this power, just to maintain any sense of narrative tension. Because it breaks both the in-universe economy and the geographical scaling of the story, I rank this a solid 4 out of 5. Up next is arguably the most completely broken visual technique in the entire series, which is the spatial manipulation known as Kamui. This eye power grants the user two distinct abilities, which are personal intangibility and the power to teleport objects into a pocket dimension. For the vast majority of the series, the masked villain uses this to simply let physical attacks pass completely harmlessly through his body. He essentially exists in two different dimensions at the exact same time, making him completely immune to any conventional physical damage. The absolute invincibility this provides removes all tension from combat, because there is virtually no counterplay for a normal warrior. The offensive application of this technique is even more problematic, because it can instantly snap a target into another dimension from a distance. The silver-haired teacher character uses this to literally rip off the arms of giant statues and decapitate massive explosive energy blasts. There is never a valid explanation for why he does not just use this to instantly snap off the heads of his main enemies. He could end every single major conflict in the series by just looking at the villain and teleporting their brain into a pocket dimension. It is an instant win button that the author had to artificially restrict with extreme stamina costs just to keep the story going. Let us explore the worst-case scenario of having a private pocket dimension where time and space operate under your absolute control. You could abduct any political leader, drop them into your void, and nobody would ever be able to find them or rescue them. You have an impenetrable vault for stolen resources, endless storage for weapons, and an absolute safe haven from any global catastrophe. The fact that this power is locked behind a specific genetic trait is the only thing preventing total, worldwide structural collapse. I'm going to kick this off with a 5 out of 5, because it turns the user into an untouchable, literal god. Speaking of broken visual techniques, we absolutely must talk about the ultimate mind control ability known as Kotoa Matsukami. This technique allows the user to enter the mind of any individual within their field of view and manipulate them completely. The terrifying part is that the victim is completely unaware they are being manipulated and genuinely believes the implanted thoughts are their own. It does not require any direct eye contact and leaves absolutely no magical trace, making it the perfect weapon for political domination. You could walk into a room, look at the supreme military commander, and instantly make him surrender his entire nation to your rule. The author clearly realized how irreparably broken this ability was, so he slapped an arbitrary 10-year cooldown timer on its usage. The logic was that the user could only cast this spell once a decade, which prevents them from just taking over the entire world. However, this limitation is completely destroyed by the introduction of the magical genetic cells from the first village leader. If you implant these magical tree cells into your body, the 10-year cooldown is suddenly reduced to just a few short hours. This fundamentally breaks every single political and military conflict, because the user can rewrite the allegiance of an entire army every afternoon. If a bad actor possessed this specific eyeball and those genetic cells, society would cease to exist as a free will collective. The user could systematically mind control every single feudal lord, military general, and wealthy merchant until they secretly ruled the entire globe. Nobody would even rebel, because the victims genuinely believe their choices to support the dictator are completely organic and logical. It turns magic into a weapon of mass psychological destruction in a way that there could be no conflict or resistance anymore. For completely erasing the concept of free will without any viable countermeasure, this is a massive 5 out of 5 plot hole. Now, we are moving on to a spell that fundamentally ignores the rules of life and death, which is the reality rewriting Izanagi. This technique was originally described as the ultimate illusion that is cast not on another person, but on reality itself. When a user activates this spell, any fatal injury or even death is instantly rewritten into a mere dream, erasing the consequence entirely. The user can literally be blown to pieces, and a second later they reappear completely unharmed, as if nothing happened. The steep price for this absolute defiance of reality is that the eye used to cast the spell goes permanently blind immediately afterward. On the surface, sacrificing an eye for an extra life seems like a fair trade that prevents the technique from being overly spammed. But the plot hole expands massively when you remember that certain characters have secret laboratories filled with hundreds of spare eyeballs. A wealthy or powerful villain could simply surgically implant a dozen eyes into their arm and effectively become immortal for 10 straight minutes. The masked villain does exactly this during a fight against a paper-manipulating ninja to survive 10 minutes of continuous explosions. It turns the sacred biological traits of a proud warrior family into literal extra-life tokens you would feed into an arcade machine. The counter to this technique introduces an even more confusing plot hole, which is the infinite time loop illusion known as Izanami. The creator of the series realized that villains spamming immortality was a narrative dead end, so he invented a magic counterspell. This technique traps the victim in an infinite mental time loop of the exact same moment, repeating forever inside their own head. The victim is forced to stand completely paralyzed in the real world, while their mind experiences the exact same sequence of events endlessly. The only way to break the loop is for the victim to magically realize their own inner flaws and accept their true destiny. This introduces a bizarre objective morality mechanic into a universe that is otherwise entirely based on subjective military and political conflicts. The spell apparently decides what the true destiny of a person is and punishes them infinitely until they agree with the spell. Who decides what the right path actually is, and why does a biological eye have the power to enforce cosmic moral alignment? It is clearly a panicked writing decision designed to defeat a specific immortal villain without having to overpower him in physical combat. Both of these reality-altering visual techniques receive a 4 out of 5 for destroying the stakes of death and introducing messy philosophy. This brings us to the absolute pinnacle of narrative destruction, which is the horrific reanimation technique known as Edo Tensei. This forbidden spell brings the souls of dead warriors back from the afterlife and places them into the bodies of living human sacrifices. The resurrected zombies retain all of their original memories, skills, and magical abilities while operating under the complete control of the caster. Not only are they functionally immortal and capable of regenerating from a pile of dust, but they also possess infinite magical energy. This means they can endlessly spam massive destructive attacks that would normally cause a living person to die from pure exhaustion. By all accounts, this technique is completely unstoppable once it is cast, because killing the original caster does not stop the zombies. The only ways to defeat these undead warriors are to physically seal their bodies away or use powerful emotional therapy to grant them peace. We see a villain use this technique to resurrect an entire army of the most powerful historical figures to fight the entire modern world. He literally digs up the graves of previous global leaders, legendary swordsmen, and terrorist villains to create a perfect, unkillable military force. The fact that a single ambitious nerd can hold the entire globe hostage by robbing a few graveyards is utterly ridiculous. Let us think about the massive implications of having an army of infinite energy zombies that cannot be destroyed by conventional means. A corrupt government could just resurrect their best farmers and construction workers to perform infinite free labor without needing food or sleep. You could create a perpetual energy machine by having an undead wizard endlessly generate electricity or fire to power entire industrial cities. The entire economy would instantly crash because living workers simply cannot compete with immortal undead slaves who have infinite physical stamina. It completely invalidates the value of human life and turns the afterlife into a cheap waiting room for future military drafts. Furthermore, the technique breaks the emotional weight of every single tragic death that happened earlier in the beloved story. Characters who had beautiful and heartbreaking farewell scenes are violently ripped back into the narrative just to perform cheap fan service battles. It removes the permanence of death, which is the fundamental driving force behind almost every character motivation and emotional arc in the series. If you can just bring your dead mentor back to life to ask him a few questions, then grief loses all of its narrative meaning. The author basically used this spell to revive every popular character solely to increase the scale of the final apocalyptic war arc. The most ridiculous application of this technique happens when the resurrected founder of the visual clan drops a pair of actual meteorites. This undead legendary warrior uses his infinite energy cheat code to pull massive chunks of rock from the vacuum of outer space. He effortlessly drops 2 mountains onto a battlefield, wiping out an entire army division in seconds, just to test his newly acquired powers. When asked what the heroes will do about the second meteor, the story provides no logical answer because the power scaling is completely shattered. Giving infinite regenerative health and infinite magic to the strongest characters in history is the textbook definition of breaking a fictional universe. For its complete destruction of narrative stakes, emotional permanence, and combat logic, the reanimation technique earns an easy 5 out of 5. It goes far beyond simply ripping a hole in the space-time continuum and actively destroys the foundational rules of the fictional world. There is absolutely no reason why every major hidden village is not constantly trying to perfect this spell to maintain their military supremacy. The fact that the allied nations banned it based on moral grounds makes no sense for societies that actively deploy child soldiers. It is the ultimate plot hole generator that completely derailed the final third of the entire long-running manga series. Moving back slightly to the realm of physical combat, we need to discuss the molecular dismantling power known as particle-style dust release. This incredibly advanced technique allows the user to fire a geometric shape of light that completely disintegrates anything caught inside its borders. It separates matter on a subatomic level, essentially deleting physical objects, human bodies, and enemy magical attacks from existence in a single moment. An elderly village leader uses this to completely erase massive island-sized objects simply by waving his hands and expanding a glowing cube. There is virtually no physical defense against a beam of light that ignores durability and completely deletes your atoms from the universe. The sheer destructive potential of this technique raises a massive question about why the Hidden Stone Village ever struggled in any global conflict. The elderly leader could simply fly into the sky above an enemy capital city and drop a massive atomic deletion cube on their headquarters. He could end entire wars in a single afternoon by deleting the opposing military generals while remaining completely out of their attack range. The author limits this by making the old man complain about back pain whenever he needs to excuse him from instantly winning a battle. I am giving this a 4 out of 5 for introducing localized atomic deletion into a story about teenagers throwing metal stars at each other. Up next is the gravity manipulation technique utilized by the leader of the terrorist organization known as Almighty Push and Planetary Devastation. The user can create massive gravitational fields to violently push all matter away from them or pull everything into a dense, crushing sphere. We see this character float above the main village and release a massive wave of repelling force that instantly flattens the entire city into dust. He destroyed decades of infrastructure and killed thousands of civilians in literally 2 seconds simply by stretching out his arms and speaking. It operates on a scale of mass destruction that makes all traditional military fortifications and defense strategies completely obsolete and utterly useless. The ultimate version of this gravity power involves creating a black gravity core and launching it into the sky to attract all nearby terrain. The Earth rips itself apart as thousands of tons of rock and forest are violently pulled into the sky to form a floating miniature moon. The villain uses this to trap a massive legendary demon underneath millions of pounds of compressed rock floating high above the clouds. If someone with bad intentions decided to just drop that newly formed moon back onto the planet, it would cause a literal extinction-level event. Giving a depressed orphan the ability to casually generate extinction-level gravitational anomalies easily earns a massive 5 out of 5 ranking. We also need to analyze the bizarre physics of the expansion technique used by the butterfly clan of the Hidden Leaf Village. These warriors can instantly multiply the physical size and mass of their own bodies, turning into towering giants that rival entire mountains. They do this by converting their stored physical calories directly into massive amounts of raw magical energy and physical bodily mass. The fundamental laws of physics and the conservation of mass are completely thrown out the window when a human instantly becomes a skyscraper. The sheer volume of calories required to instantly generate thousands of tons of bone and muscle mass is completely impossible to calculate. Even more problematic is the complete lack of collateral damage when these massive giants walk around normal civilian areas during combat operations. A human-sized foot suddenly expanding to the size of a city block should instantly crush buildings and cause massive seismic shockwaves. Yet they manage to fight inside the village without accidentally stepping on their own friends or sinking completely into the soft dirt. The real danger here is the economic impact of feeding an army of people who can instantly metabolize a lifetime of food in seconds. I will give the expansion technique a 3 out of 5 because it breaks physics, but mostly just makes the local restaurants go bankrupt. Finally, we must discuss the absolute peak of broken law, which is the legendary technique known as the creation of all things. This ability was used by the ancient sage of the 6 paths and represents the literal power of a creator god in this universe. The user can take pure, raw spiritual energy and transform it into physical, tangible matter, bringing mere thoughts into actual physical existence. The ancient sage used this exact power to divide a massive world-ending energy monster into 9 separate, living and breathing, intelligent creatures. It is the literal power of divine genesis, which completely removes the story from its original roots of tactical ninja espionage and deception. If this technique was ever learned by an ordinary human, they could essentially rewrite the entire structure of the universe on a whim. They could instantly generate infinite amounts of food, water, gold, or even create brand new sentient species to serve their every command. The existence of this power renders all human conflict meaningless, because a true master could just physically manifest whatever resource they desire. It is the ultimate magical plot hole, because it proves that the magical energy of this world has no actual defined limits or rules. I give the creation of all things a definitive 6 out of 5, because it literally breaks the ceiling of our entire rating system. we absolutely must address the terrifying implications of the ultimate sealing technique known across the world as the Reaper Death Seal. The user summons an actual ethereal god of death who physically reaches its hand right through the stomach of the original caster. This demonic entity rips the soul directly out of the target and seals it away forever inside its own massive glowing stomach. The steep absolute price for summoning this cosmic horror is that the soul of the caster is also consumed by the death god. Both souls are trapped inside the belly of the beast for all eternity, completely locked in a state of endless, agonizing combat. The existence of a literal, tangible god of death introduces massive cosmological plot holes into a story about earthly political ninja conflicts. If this cosmic entity actually exists and can be summoned by simply weaving a few hand gestures, then the universe is completely terrifying. It implies the existence of a definitive afterlife that can be directly manipulated and interacted with by normal mortal human beings through magic. Why does the death god respond to a simple human contract, and why does it allow itself to be used for petty political assassinations? The sheer magnitude of summoning a true deity makes all other elemental magic in the series seem completely insignificant and entirely pointless. The worst-case scenario for this technique is a fanatical suicide squad systematically deleting the most powerful political leaders in the entire world. A rogue terrorist organization could brainwash low-level soldiers into rushing the enemy leadership and immediately sacrificing themselves to cast the death seal. There is virtually no physical defense against the ethereal arm of a god, meaning the strongest warrior alive could be killed by a peasant. The only reason society has not collapsed from suicide-bombing soul stealers is because the author rarely allows the villains to use this spell. I am giving this absolute horror a 4 out of 5 for introducing cosmic deities and unbreakable assassination mechanics into the lore. Let us pivot to a purely physical technique that completely breaks the biological rules of the human body, known as the 8 inner gates. This martial arts technique involves forcibly removing the natural psychological and physical limiters that prevent the human body from completely destroying itself. By opening these specific energy valves along the spine, the user pumps massive amounts of adrenaline and magical energy directly into their bloodstream. The user gains physical speed and raw destructive power that completely dwarfs the abilities of the most elite magical wizards in the entire world. The absolute final stage literally boils the blood of the user, completely tearing their muscles into shreds and cooking their internal organs. The massive plot hole here is the unbelievable power scaling that a completely normal human being can achieve just by kicking really hard. A man who possessed zero magical talent was able to physically bend the space-time continuum simply by moving his legs incredibly fast. He punched a legendary god-tier villain so hard that half of the villain's torso was completely obliterated into a mist of blood. If basic physical training and the willingness to die can grant you power that rivals literal gods, then the entire magic system is useless. Every single hidden village should have an entire army of suicide soldiers trained specifically to open the final gate during a global crisis. Imagine an army of 1,000 low-tier soldiers opening the final gate simultaneously and rushing an enemy continent at supersonic speeds. They would physically trample entire nations into dust before their own bodies burned away, making all strategic warfare and magical defenses entirely obsolete. The economy of war would shift from training elite complex wizards to simply breeding fanatical physical brawlers willing to die for the homeland. The author had to miraculously save the main user from the mandatory death penalty of this technique using literal god magic at the last second. Because it breaks the combat scaling and proves that physical kicks are stronger than legendary magic, I give this a 4 out of 5. That is going to conclude our comprehensive ranking of the most broken and logically inconsistent techniques in the entire history of the ninja world. We started with harmless identity theft that would crush the banking system and ended with literal god magic that can create sentient life. Do you agree with my harsh assessments of these incredibly popular magical abilities, or do you think I'm being entirely too analytical? Did I miss a specific powerful technique that you think completely destroys the narrative logic and deserves a spot on this massive list? Let me know your detailed thoughts down in the comments section, because debating the logistics of anime magic is what we do best. If you enjoyed this incredibly long and detailed dive into the massive plot holes of a famous series, please consider liking the video. You should definitely subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content breaking down the fundamental logic of your favorite fictional worlds. Your continued support helps me keep making these extensive analytical essays about the characters and mechanics we all love to discuss online. I will be doing many more videos like this in the near future, exploring other popular media and their deeply hidden logical inconsistencies. Thank you all so much for watching the video today, and I look forward to seeing you all in the very next upload.